We had a great time going down I-71 on our crop tour. We worked our way through the northeast and on down to the southeast part of the state today. And we're obviously the vastly superior of the two groups because we found a pretty good mix of crops out there. We found some pests, we found some diseases. We started out in Medina County, we had 31 bushels, and that was our low for the beans. Our low for the corn was today in Fairfield County, where John Miller and I are both from, and that was an astonishing 64 bushels, and that was a miserable looking field. So John, I first want to talk to you. That was definitely a low point, and maybe it was a little disheartening for you being a farmer in Fairfield County looking at that kind of yield.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts?
It was extremely depressing. After being through half the state yesterday and seeing how well things were, maybe not extremely well, but compared to what we've been driving through and seeing in Fairfield County, I was kind of jealous of the other farmers around the state having 140 to 160 bushel yields, and you get home and you're 100 bushel off that. It's quite depressing when you go through and the county you're living in is the worst one you find. So.
And we also noticed as we were driving around, we saw some resistant weeds popping up here and there. And I thought maybe John could talk a little bit about some of the resistant weed problems we've been seeing. And we assume they're resistant. There was a lot of mare's tail. What else were you seeing out there, John, in terms of weed pressure?
There was a little bit of ragweed, common, and giant. And then there was also some lamb's quarter. But I'd say 90% of the problem looks like the mare's tail resistance in the soybeans. We're assuming it's Roundup soybeans. That could always be non-GMO beans, but mare's tail is definitely a problem in the state.
And overall, over the course of the 2 days, we found an average yield for corn of 144 bushels. Our high was 189, and our low was at 64 in Fairfield County. And Glenn, I wanted to ask you about, as we looked at the fields as we were driving along, some of those fields maybe looked a little worse than the ones we were taking yield counts in. What were your thoughts on the accuracy of our counts, and how do we stack up compared to what we saw versus what we were actually counting? What do you think, Glenn?
I think on the corn side, I think we did a pretty good job. Now, there again, you're subject to what field you happen to stop at. There were several areas that we drive by a couple poor fields, and then just happened to be where our location we were supposed to stop was a little better field. Same way with beans. We did that a couple times of maybe getting in the better field. The bean formula, I feel, is a little high. I think our yields probably won't hit the level that we found on this tour. Corn, I'm not so sure. We're fairly close on the corn, I'm guessing.
And the beans averaged 59.5 for the course of our 2 days. And so, yeah, they may have been a little on the high side, and a lot of times it seems like that's a little more of a guessing game than the corn. Kurt Fisher out in the bean fields and the corn fields with all the rest of us, and we did see a few places where there was some disease pressure and insects. Kurt, what kind of problems were you seeing out there with those things?
There was some grasshoppers in some of the we've seen in the soybean fields, some spider mites, I'd say. There were some blights in the corn. We've seen a lot of shredded leaves too. I think that was probably from some high winds, straight line winds you had. We discussed it, I think. We were trying to figure out where some of that came from. And it varied. It just seemed, where we had more droughts, we had more of the insect damage and more of the disease showing up prevalent. The worse the fields were, the worse it showed up. But like you said, we drove past a lot of good fields and drove past a lot of real poor fields. So I agree with Glenn and John. I think the soybeans are probably a little on the high side. Always had a trouble ever doing soybean checks when I was farming. Corn yields, we might be a little high, but I think we're pretty close, probably overall. I guess harvest will tell. I think when we go back, look at this next winter, we'll know the story.
And overall, the averages were 139 for corn for both groups, coming down both sides of the state, and the beans were right at 59. So we had a great time, and it was a great learning experience on the crop tour of 2012.